Every day, we use big data to make even our most mundane, routine decisions data-informed. When it comes to our most critical decisions, those in the crisis management realm that pertain to the preservation of life, property, the environment, and our economy, there's a massive digital divide. When we need that data most, it's either unavailable, not directly accessible to crisis managers and first responders, or frankly, and I'll admit this between you and me, as a crisis manager, we don't even know the data exists. Just last week, I was in a meeting with an executive who insisted that we don't need direct access to data. We just need to know who to call, sort of like that phone a friend lifeline. Let me tell you how that plays out in a dynamic incident. A few years ago, there was a tanker carrying 7,500 gallons of gasoline that crashed and overturned in a tunnel just north of downtown Los Angeles. While most of the gasoline was burning off in the fire, there was significant concern about the runoff in the storm drains and the LA River. Now, the incident commander from the fire department, he didn't know the location of every storm drain in the vicinity, but he knew who to call. From the moment he phoned Public Works to the moment he received hand-delivered paper maps to the back of his Suburban, it was 3 hours. 3 hours. Can you imagine if Google or Siri took 3 hours to respond to any of our requests? Can you imagine if we didn't have access to just the weather or traffic conditions at our fingertips? In 2018, there's no reason why crisis managers should have to wait for hand-delivered paper maps. The stakes are too high. We're talking about life, property, the environment, and the economy. There's no reason why we should be making decisions in a vacuum. The good news is that the technology that's needed to close this digital divide, it already exists. It's geographic information systems. GIS, which is rooted in the science of geography, allows us to bring big data into a single map, to visualize it and analyze it. It helps us bring spatial context to big data so we can hone in on what's relevant and important and turn off all of that other noise. Now, some of you might be thinking, GIS has been around for a long time. Crisis managers, get with the program. But if you've used GIS, you know that it's really only available and accessible to those highly trained and highly skilled GIS professionals. They sit down across the table from us, and the conversation usually goes something like this. GIS professional, what do you want to achieve? Crisis manager, well, what's possible? GIS professional, just tell me what you want to achieve. And thus begins the circular conversation. Now, everybody has the best of intentions, but they're not crisis managers. They can't anticipate our needs, especially in a rapidly evolving dynamic incident. And we're not GIS professionals, so we can't even dream, we can't fathom what's possible with this technology. At the LA Homeland Security Advisory Council, we are working to cause a paradigm shift in the way crisis managers, first responders, and policymakers consider and utilize GIS. Through SALIS, our crisis and event management platform, we are putting GIS directly into the hands of those non-GIS professionals through a collection of online tools and mobile apps. For those of you who are curious, SALIS is not an acronym. SALIS was the Roman goddess of public welfare. Through SALIS, we facilitate data-informed decision-making, resource management, information sharing, and situational awareness. Let me be clear, when I talk about crisis management, I'm not just referring to those major fires, earthquakes, tsunamis, extreme weather, volcanic activity. Crisis management, SALIS, it covers so much more. On the one end of the spectrum, it covers those large-scale pre-planned events. SALIS was used at the LA Marathon, and for the first time ever this year, all of those agencies who are responsible for making sure that event goes off without a hitch, from Recreation and Parks, Street Services, Department of Transportation, Fire Department, Police Department, even the marathon coordinators, for the first time ever, they had access to the real-time location of the runners, and they had access to that in the context of a map. They could see where they were along the route in relation to the aid stations and water stations, and in some cases, even the treatment and transport of the injured runners. See, in the past, they had to wait for hourly briefings, or they had to use their lifeline, and they had to physically walk over to the marathon coordinator to get that information. Every runner is issued a bib with an RFID chip. That's how they track their pace, and they're aware of their finish time. This is the perfect example of how data created for one purpose, when it's shared and made available, can totally transform another. On the other end of the spectrum, crisis management includes social issues that impact all of our communities. SALIS is being used as the basis to facilitate and support the strategy to address the homeless crisis. There are countless departments, agencies, jurisdictions who are involved in this critical effort. And each and every one of them have been captive in their silos because of the limitations of their technology. Whether they're using Excel spreadsheets or sophisticated CAD, they do not have a way to share that data. Through SALIS, they can bring all of their data into a common platform, they can visualize it on a map, they can start to identify spatial trends and causal relationships. SALIS is the basis for their true partnership. Now, I could go on and on about crisis management and SALIS for hours, but I want to just close in the interest of time with one more story about a fire. This time, the fire department did have access to GIS through SALIS. A few months ago, in the early hours of the Creek fire, I received a frantic call from the fire department. They had been using SALIS to do an analysis of the impacted population, to identify our critical populations, hospitals, dialysis clinics, acute psychiatric facilities, and to understand the community who is being impacted. The police department had just announced that 250,000 people had to be evacuated. Now, the fire department was frantic because SALIS was showing 107,000 people. They wanted me to explain the discrepancy. My response was simple. You're using the census data in SALIS. What is the police department using? Silence. They took it one step further, and as you can see from the map, they utilized data like median income to really understand that community, to identify who actually needs to show up at a shelter, who's going to count on us for their next meal, who's going to need bus transportation because they don't have their own vehicles to evacuate from the area. They started with 250,000, went to 107,000, and continued to whittle it down. They use big data so that they can make an informed assumption, so they could eventually manage their resources effectively and only bring in those buses and activate those shelters and cook those meals that actually would be needed. I challenge you to consider how GIS may empower you to make data-informed decisions. I challenge you to consider how your data, how if you share that data, can help you and others connect the dots, how it can transform your processes so that you can step out of your big picture and into the grand picture. Thank you.